Hello, I'm Cecilia Louie of Paper Zen. I really wanted to show in this case how items can actually spill outside the letter. It can get a little tricky because there isn't always a set length where you're going to be spilling out the way I've drawn it here, or you might have a different letter, so I just want to give this as an example of what you can do. The letter G is similar to the letter C in that it has an inside shape. In my book, Quilling Letters, the length of the paper wasn't long enough to show this entire strip in one piece. It gets joined right there at that corner. But that's not really a big deal because it's really easy for you to connect 1, 2, and 3 on one strip of 8.5, well, one strip of 11 inch length of strip. So that's what I've done actually. So I've made 1, 2, and 3 one strip, and then I continue on with 4 up to 8. Now if I was only outlining the letter, and let's just say you had a longer length of paper than I'm working with, what I would do is similar to the letter C. I would secure this strip down and this strip down, and then deal with the inside shape. Then working your way all around here, that should be easy enough to slip glue along underneath these strips and then work your way backward that way. But in this case, because I'm making these shapes spill out, I'll show you my methodology and hopefully that's going to help you. These teardrop shapes, I think I saw them first on Yulia Bretskaya's work, and who doesn't love Yulia's work? It's very energetic, it's dynamic, I just love it. My nephew's name begins with the letter G, so I just thought this would be a great time for me to make his next birthday card and kill two birds with one stone. As you well know by now, I don't like to do the same example twice, so in this case I was rummaging through my drawers and found a card that I had already prepared a while ago and didn't end up using. It's already 5x7, it's made out of Star Dream metallic paper cardstock, so it was already ready for me to go. It's blue, and sometimes with quilling it's hard to do things for guys, so I thought this was going to address quite a few issues. So I'm using more boyish kind of colors, and hopefully this will help you generate some ideas for the guys in your life. And as usual, you'll be able to download this 5x7 template for free. Just substitute my letter using this baseline and center line with the letter that you're choosing. It's just a little bit offset higher from the bottom so that it just sits well when you place the card on the table when you're done. So I've already shaped my outline and laid it on top and made sure that my curves are generally following my outline. And as I mentioned, so strips 1, 2, 3 have already been made in one strip, and then this is separate from that. So let's get started with gluing this one down. So I'm only going to glue this part and this part. I'm going to let this part hang free until I determine how these cut through the shape. I'm putting glue in a thin layer on this plastic card, and I'm only going to dip just the straight area right now. I guess I tackle it this way in part because it's just easier when one part of it's glued down and there's less items hanging in the air that are wet with glue that might touch my card and accidentally leave some glue there. So I really should let this dry first, but what I'm going to do is just move this guy out of the way. It's not a big deal, it's just a fold. It's very easy for the paper to come back to where it needs to be. And I'm going to test how this strip is looking. Now I made sure it was pretty much following my curve, so I'm not sure if you can tell, but it's actually pretty bang on. So I feel really safe in putting this strip on top of my card. And I'm lifting, with this hand, I'm lifting this part of the strip, so it's actually not touching the card. This is when you wish that you were an octopus. But I'm keeping it in the air. And then it's like watching an episode of Jacques Cousteau. I realize I'm holding my breath so that it doesn't disturb my focus. It's quite funny sometimes when you sit back and realize. Now, sometimes, like in this case, I did kind of apply my glue puddle a little thick, so I do see a little bit of glue on the edge, so it's not a big deal. I just kind of, before it dries, I just take my tool and come along and scrape it off. So this part here can get tricky because I don't want to have any of this thing overhang or this to be short. I want it to be just right. And so I just put my card up against this edge, and so when I go to glue this part, it just tucks up and meets up with it. So it's a nice sharp corner. So because it's kind of hard to get into here, and because this is all angular, it should be a lot easier to deal with than this little animal. So I feel confident in gluing up to from here to here. So it really depends on how comfortable you are at your stage of quilling. You don't have to follow what I'm doing to the letter, no pun intended. But it just comes down to what you're comfortable with. And so that's how I get that corner piece to match up. And a lot of times I will rotate my work to make sure it's always facing me where I have the best angle of things. And because the glue hasn't dried, I don't know if you noticed, but I actually picked this part up, and in turn that ended up picking up that one. It's not a big deal because it's not quite dry yet, but you want to place it back down and let the glue set properly. So even though the Aleene's tacky glue is quite thick, it still allows me some workability around that. Now I've already created my shapes, so it's going to be easy for me to apply that here now. So I've put all the elements of the letter on top of the card. None of it is glued down just yet. It basically allows me to see, do I have the spacing the way I want it to be? A lot of times, even though I draw things a certain way, it actually doesn't turn out looking like how it ended up being in my drawing. So just so you know, it's not, sometimes the paper just kind of dictates what it wants to do, and I just kind of let it. The drawing is more of a like a general feeling, like a sketch or a mock-up. So just because it doesn't look like you're drawing, not a big deal. Just let the paper do its own thing and you'll be fine. After I've confirmed that all the pieces fit on the card, I transfer them back onto my illustration to kind of use it as a parking spot until I'm ready to glue them back here and I remember, oh yeah, that was in that area. So I'll be tackling this guy first. Start off with the largest piece in the design and work my way around it. I'm going to fast forward the filming here to save you time, but you can still see what pieces I work with next. I tend to tackle small pieces or pieces near corners last. If I do need to fudge here and there, it's easier to do that with a small piece, you see. Even though you plan, sometimes the pieces get glued down a little differently than I imagine. But no one else knows, so you and me need to stop critiquing it so harshly, right? So even though this shape here, this purple one, isn't glued down, I put it in its place so that I have something to eyeball when I'm placing this one. So now it's time to measure the remaining stroke, and I'm just going to pinch where I see it from above, and it might not be exact, that's okay. I'm going to leave it being a little longer, so there's this part here that will be missing from this stroke. So in other words, what I did was I cut more like around this area so that I have a lot left over and not under, because I can't lengthen this strip. So I know I can better tell when it's such a long strip to cut, it's a little interfering. So this way I can measure it again and again and be more precise as I go. So I think that's pretty much where I want it to be. I'm going to apply some glue right around here, close to the edge. And then as I applied this strip, I realized this guy didn't quite make it to the card. Not a big deal, because this is what I tend to do. I just kind of lift it up, slide it on top of the glue, reapply, and glue it down. Again, it might seem tedious, but it's the only way to make sure you've got the exact length. Measure, 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 snip, snip, snip. That's just how it goes. Now in this case, I'm not going to glue the entire length. I'm going to attach this corner following my score line, because it's kind of hard when there's nothing to help anchor this curve. So I find it's better to just work section by section instead. Before your glue puddle dries, it's good to use the last bit of it to secure these ends and make the overall design stronger. So after making the letter, I felt that the strips kind of blended in with the background. Not blended in, but I just wanted the letter to pop a bit more. So I'm using Brilliant's Dewdrop Platinum Planet is the ink color. It's just an ink pad that I plan on dabbing on just the surface of these letters to make the top surface pop right off the page. And it kind of goes with the metallic paper in the background and kind of highlights all these edges and just gives it an extra wow factor when someone looks at it. They kind of wonder, how did you get just that line on top to be so effervescent? So now it pops right off the page, and when you view it from the side, it still has the usual kind of color, but that's kind of fun, right? Now these are confetti pieces that I plan on putting around it, and I'll just quickly show you how to make those. I just arbitrarily took a length maybe about 1 inch long and coiling it around my crochet hook. That's how I create those shapes. Now to create these teardrop shapes, I'm going to soften my strip into an S, and then one of these ends I'm going to tear. So, and the reason why I want to tear it is because I want the join to be a lot more smooth and transition nicely. So now I'm going to rub one section, and now it kind of curves into itself. And so because I tore this end, when I go to join it with glue, it's going to be smoother. And that's how I create a teardrop shape. And if you're wondering about this scroll here, I actually don't know the official name of it, where there's a typical loose scroll and then another one kind of spooning it. And so I don't know the actual term for it, but I'm sure maybe someone can leave a comment below and tell me what the official name of it is. Maybe I think it's a double scroll or something. Anyway, I just thought it would be kind of fun to at least include some quilt coils. So after you create a typical loose scroll, I tear one end and soften it and get it to mimic and find the length I want about there, and then tear this end make sure it's matching up nicely. I've seen some examples where people show what they do is they have it kind of doubled up, where they do that and then they start quilling from there and adjusting. I just find I didn't like the extra bulk in there, so I just kind of do it this way. I'm sure whichever way you decide to use it, it's going to turn out great anyway. So I just basically determine how much distance I want from these two coils and hold it in place. I sometimes use the length of my needle tool just to burnish and get a good seam. So that's how I create that shape. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up or leave me some comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.